Especially with something like What the Passion That I Did, the written word was very important because it was, you got all those books, the Bible, you've got the different Gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with. Something extraordinary has happened, something that bridges faith, science, and the mystery of time itself. Mel Gibson, the man who once shook Hollywood with the Passion of the Christ, has come forward with a discovery that many are calling divine. It's not another film or performance, it's something far more profound, a revelation found not in a studio or a script, but in a piece of cloth that has defied explanation for centuries, the Shroud of Turin. For over 600 years, this linen has captured the imagination of both believers and skeptics alike. It bears a faint ghostly image of a man who appears to have been tortured, crucified, and laid to rest. To millions, it is the burial shroud of Jesus Christ, to others, it's an elaborate medieval forgery. But to Mel Gibson, it became something deeply personal, a message hidden in fibers, waiting to be seen not just with the eyes but with the soul. Before the world knew him as the director who brought Christ's suffering to life on screen, Mel Gibson was a man in search of meaning. Born into a devout Catholic family in Peekskill, New York, he grew up surrounded by faith, ritual, and moral conviction. His father, Hutton, taught him that the world's truths were layered, that sometimes the spiritual was more real than the physical. When the family moved to Australia to escape the draft, Mel's journey of faith took its first uncertain step into the unknown. Acting became his sanctuary. In the theatres of Sydney, he found a strange kind of prayer, the ability to embody emotion, truth, and vulnerability. His roles in Mad Max and Lethal Weapon made him a global icon, but behind the fame, he was haunted by an inner void. The applause couldn't silence the quiet ache for something eternal. The more successful he became, the more he felt a whisper in his soul, there's more. That whisper became a roar when he began working on Braveheart. Beneath its battles and bloodshed lay a story about faith, freedom, and sacrifice, themes that reflected his own struggles. But it wasn't until the Passion of the Christ that Gibson would face the divine directly. He didn't just direct that film, he lived it. Every frame was prayer, every scene was devotion. The suffering of Christ became the mirror of his own brokenness. When the film premiered, the world was divided. Some called it a masterpiece of faith, others condemned it for its brutality, but regardless of opinion, one truth remained: millions left theaters in tears, feeling something they couldn't explain. And for Gibson, the experience changed everything. It broke him open. Fame no longer mattered, what mattered was truth. Years later, as he began work on the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, Gibson found himself drawn back into scripture, history, and relics. That's when the Shroud of Turin reappeared in his life, not as a curiosity but as a calling. He began reading everything about it, the ancient legends, the scientific studies, the controversies. The more he learned, the more it seemed to whisper the same truth his heart already knew, that faith and science were not enemies but reflections of one divine reality. The shroud itself is unlike anything else on earth, a long strip of woven linen faintly marked with the image of a crucified man. The wounds match those described in the Gospels: the pierced wrists, the scourged back, the thorn wounds around the head, the spear mark in the side. But the strangest part is how the image came to be. No brush strokes, no pigment, no explanation, just a burn-like discoloration that sits only on the uppermost fibers, as if light itself had kissed the cloth without destroying it. In 1898, when an amateur photographer named Pierre took the first photographs of the shroud, the world gasped. The negative would reveal a face, lifelike, haunting, serene, undeniably human. It was as if the cloth had been waiting for photography to be invented to reveal its true self. Scientists could not explain it, painters could not reproduce it, and believers fell to their knees. Throughout the 20th century, teams of researchers examined it with microscopes, ultraviolet lights, and modern imaging tools. What they found deepened the mystery. The image wasn't painted, it wasn't scorched by heat. It was created by something that acted on the atomic level, like radiation, and no one, not even with today's technology, can reproduce it without destroying the fibers. For Gibson, that discovery hit differently. As a filmmaker obsessed with light and shadow, he saw it as a divine form of photography, an image made not by human hands but by a burst of unearthly energy. The church remained cautious, guarding the relic but never declaring it authentic. Then came 1988, when carbon dating tests seemed to crush believers' hopes. Scientists concluded the linen was from the Middle Ages, not the 1st century. But later analyses revealed that the samples had been taken from a section repaired after a 15th century fire, a patch woven with newer material. The results, therefore, were compromised. When that truth emerged, the debate reignited like a flame that refused to die. By the time Gibson began exploring the Shroud in depth, new technology was available: spectral analysis, digital 3D rendering, and even atomic-level scanning. He consulted experts from Italy, the US, and Israel. He pored over reports showing traces of pollen from Jerusalem, limestone dust identical to that found near ancient tombs, and faint imprints near the eyes, circles matching Roman coins minted under Emperor Tiberius' burial coins, just as described in ancient customs. It wasn't just the science that moved him, it was the feeling, the presence that surrounded the cloth. When Gibson visited Trin privately in 2022, the cathedral was empty. Under dim light, he stood before the relic that millions had wept over, and something happened. As he later told intimate friends, it was as if standing before the juncture of heaven and earth. The air was alive. He said he could almost feel the instant of resurrection, the flash that turned death into light. What he then observed would transform him forever. Near the face, outlines, shapes he had not seen in photographs, were faintly visible, circles almost perfect, positioned where the eyes would be. When magnified, they revealed the faint design of Roman coins bearing the name of Emperor Tiberius, coins dated to 29 to 31 AD, the exact years of the crucifixion. It wasn't imagination, independent imaging confirmed it, and the coincidence was too perfect to ignore. After that encounter, Gibson funded a series of independent imaging studies using advanced 3D modeling and ultraviolet scanning, and the results were startling. The image on the shroud, when digitally reconstructed, revealed depth, a true three-dimensional form. The nose, the cheekbones, the folded arms, everything appeared as though captured by light from every angle at once. It was the world's first holographic relic, created 2 millennia ago without any human technology. That's when Gibson said he finally understood, the image wasn't formed by decay, it was formed by life, a burst of energy so pure and instantaneous that it left an atomic shadow of the resurrection itself. To him, it wasn't just faith anymore, it was evidence, not proof that could be measured, but proof that could be felt, a meeting point between the divine and the measurable. He spoke about this publicly for the first time on the Joe Rogan Experience. Rogan, ever curious, pressed him with tough questions about faith, science, and miracles, but Gibson didn't flinch. He explained that scientists had identified the energy required to create such an image as equivalent to several billion watts of light released in a fraction of a second, the same kind of radiation that could occur if matter was suddenly transformed into energy. That, Gibson said quietly, is what resurrection would look like. The room fell silent. Rogan, normally skeptical, leaned forward and asked if Gibson believed this was scientific proof of Christ. Mel shook his head. No, he said. It's not proof. Proof is for the mind. This is presence for the soul. He went on to describe how every analysis, every test, every pixel of the 3D render was a pointer to something beyond comprehension. We've spent centuries asking how it happened, he said, but maybe we should be asking why it happened. The clip spread across social media like wildfire, millions watched, argued, prayed. Some scientists admitted that the data deserved re-examination, while others dismissed it as spiritual bias. The Vatican released a brief statement urging caution and humility, neither confirming nor denying Gibson's interpretation. But for the faithful, the conversation had changed forever. The shroud was no longer just a relic, it was a revelation. Behind the scenes, theologians and physicists began to collaborate for the first time. The idea that light, the very essence of creation, could record the instant of resurrection began to gain traction. Some called it divine radiation, others compared it with quantum entanglement between spirit and matter. The line between miracle and mechanism was blurring, just as Gibson had said it would. When asked later if he planned to make a documentary about his findings, Gibson smiled and said, "No camera can capture what that cloth already has." Instead, he poured his energy into his next project, the resurrection. He said the film wouldn't be about suffering this time, but about transcendence, light, and rebirth. The shroud, he said, isn't about death, it's about what came after. For Gibson, the discovery was more than evidence of Christ's divinity, it was a mirror of his own life, scarred, misunderstood, redeemed. Like the cloth, he carried burns from fire but still bore the image of something greater. His faith, once tested by fame and failure, had found its anchor again in the mystery of that linen. "It's not about proving God exists," he said. "It's about realizing He's been here all along." In the following months, new 3D analyses confirmed the impossible precision of the shroud's image. AI imaging teams replicated the exact fiber patterns and concluded that no known natural process could produce them. The image intensity matched the pattern of light decay, not pigment. Some physicists referred to it as a controlled burst of ultraviolet laser radiation, but no laser on Earth could do that without disintegrating the fabric. Whatever had created the image had operated outside known physics. When asked how he reconciled this with faith, Gibson said, "Science describes the how. Faith reveals the who," and spoke of light, the very first word in Genesis and the first energy of creation. To him, the shroud was that same light concentrated in one miraculous instant, captured forever. It wasn't an artifact, it was an afterimage of eternity. But perhaps the most striking thing he said came near the end of that interview. Rogan asked, "So, Mel, what did you really find?" Gibson paused for a long moment, then said, "I found that the story didn't end on the cross. It began there. That cloth isn't about a dead man. It's about a living one." The confession broke through every boundary of culture and creed. Scientists debated, theologians pondered, and millions rewatched the interview searching for meaning. But beyond all noise, one truth echoed through it all, that something extraordinary had happened 2,000 years ago, powerful enough to leave an imprint no time could erase. In the years since, Gibson has lived quietly away from Hollywood's lights, yet those who've spoken with him say he still carries that same awe. Sometimes he describes the shroud as a photograph of a moment when heaven touched matter, other times, he simply calls it the face of mercy. Whatever words he uses, it's clear the experience marked him forever. The shroud continues to defy explanation. Each new test, each new scan adds more layers to its enigma. Some call it a miracle of physics, others an elaborate mystery of faith, but one thing remains certain, its image endures, untouched by time, untouched by doubt. And so does the man who brought its story back to light. Mel Gibson didn't set out to prove a miracle, he set out in search of truth. What he found was far greater, a bridge between belief and understanding, between the measurable and the eternal. And in that bridge, he found himself. Because in the end, the Shroud of Turin isn't about one man's image, it is about every soul searching for proof that love, even in death, leaves a trace. Perhaps that is the real miracle, not of cloth, not of science, but of the light still shining through both. And if you look closely, maybe, just maybe, that light is still shining, not from a relic, but from within every heart that dares to believe. As the camera fades to black, a soft beam of light cuts through the darkness, just a single ray falling across the ancient weave of the shroud. There emerge the faint contours of a face, illuminated by something unexplainable, alive, and not by flame or by science. Mel Gibson's voice returns, not as an actor or director but as a pilgrim. If you've ever wondered whether love can conquer death, look closer. That's not an image of a corpse, that's the echo of a moment when death itself was undone. The scene lingers long enough for the audience to feel, not analyze.